So yet another tone arm for my turntable. Now if you remember on the previous video I showed you me creating a top plate so I could mount a Rega on. I specifically bought the Rega because it was reasonably cheap and I wanted a budget arm to take budget cartridges to allow me to play old records without having to use the better quality cartridges I've got, the more expensive cartridges I've got. So I wasn't wearing those out with poor quality records essentially, and certainly it's ideal for the first play of the charity shop finds and so on, just to make sure that everything's okay. I have to say though, I wasn't overly enamoured with the Rega. It's a rather dull sounding tone arm, and that's could be exacerbated by putting the grader on, which is a smooth cartridge in its own right. So we've got two issues going on there. With that in mind, I've bought a up-to-date gold ring M3, which I will be mounting in the future for playing those old charity shop. But at the same time, I decided I wanted to put a better arm on to bring back into play some of my other cartridges that I've got, some of the other more expensive ones. So the Rega's coming off the turntable. The mount that's permanently mounted to the turntable will be used for a better quality arm and better quality cartridge, and this will be then I'll have the Rega over to one side on an independent pod which I'm going to make. And in the B-roll I scanned across some of the components that I'm going to be using, and those were specifically these metal footers. They have a receptacle in there for receiving a spike, and they have a nice foam base to them, which means that once they have any weight put in, then they don't tend to slide at all. The spikes I'm going to be using are these are just 25mm grub screws I bought, M6s, with an Allen receptacle at the top, and I already had some thumb screws for M6, and these will be going through the base plate. Now the base plate is 150mm M6, 6mm thick plate, which as you can see, I've already printed and stuck on a 360-degree protractor, which I can then mark the relevant positions where I want to mark and drill through for these various parts. So first we'll be drilling some and tapping some M6 holes to take the spikes, which will sit in the footers, and then slightly inboard of those we'll be cutting some just over 6mm holes to take some bolts which will then take the 3 pillars, which I'm going to cut from this tubing. And as you saw from the B-roll, it's a quite thick wall tubing, and in fact has a 5mm inner hole or inside diameter, which is perfect for tapping to M6. So the bolt will go through the bottom. This will screw down into the base plate. Now my calculation is that I need 3 lengths of approximately 98mm. Now I say approximately, absolutely 98mm long. Now past experience has dictated, whenever you're trying to cut some lengths precisely, unless you have some decent machinery, it isn't going to work out. I don't have a workshop. All I have is a drill press and a bench grinder. Otherwise it's just plain hand tools all the way. So I know before I start that I'm not going to be able to cut these to exactly the same length. So what I will be doing is I'll be packing the shortest one with washers to achieve the same length as the longest one. I've got some various thickness washers which I've put to one side, which are the same outside diameter, which will allow me to hopefully match up all the lengths as I go through and make them. And then, as I say, the top plate, just like, well, I'll be repurposing this Rega one, but I have others which I'm going to, while I'm in the process of cutting holes, I will also make some of the other blanks, put the mounting holes in the top so that I'm ready should I wish to buy a different tone arm at some stage for the 4th position, as it were. And then finally there's a weight. It's a jar of lead pellets, or a tin of lead pellets, and this weighs 950 kilos, and that'll be just resting in between the 3 posts to add ballast to the whole assembly. So that's the route I'm going down. This isn't the first time the turntables had 4 arms. If we go back to a previous iteration, I'll pop up some pictures in a moment, which should be now. You'll see that I had one of my bucket list tone arms I wanted to try because it was different from all the other tone arms on the market, in that it used mercury baths as the electrical contact between the arm tube and the base. So the only points of contact is a unipivot tone arm. So there was a inner spike, which then you rested the tone arm on. There's an inner well which has silicon in it to give you some damping, and then there were 4 outer wells, again picture coming up I think, which you fill with mercury, and then 4 pins came down from the top of the arm tube, which then dipped into those and formed the electrical contact. So it was damped and had theoretically very good electrical contact, with no issues of the wires interfering with the movement of the tone arm. It was called the Keith Monk's M9BA Laboratory Arm Mark III, I think it was the one that I had. Again, there'll be some pictures flashing up, so you can see it. And it was quite a nice tone arm. It did have some disadvantages. It couldn't take heavy cartridges, and excuse me, it had limited cartridge compatibility. And the other thing that was a bit disturbing was that every now and again one of the channels would perhaps drop out, and this turned out to be a build-up of a surface scum or surface skin on the mercury bars. So every now and again you had to take the arm tube off, agitate the bath, wipe down the pins, and remember we're talking about mercury here, so it's not something you particularly want to do. Plop it back on and then you'd be good for another few days. So in the end it was sold on, but it was a nice arm to try anyway. I say, one to tick off the bucket list, and I've got a few more arms on that bucket list to go through, which hopefully I'll come across at some stage or other. So anyway, those are the components that I'm going to be using to make the pod, or the armrest, or the arm mount, the independent arm mount. Be repurposing the plate I've got to go on top, and then we'll have a listen and have a look at that when it's completed, and see how I get on. The arm, I'm not sure yet what I'm going to replace the Rega. I'm considering an Origin Live, just a base level model, to see how I get on with that, whilst looking around for something a bit more expensive perhaps. In the picture when I had the previous 4-tone arm setup, you noticed that I did have a Rega at the back, but that was the previous, and to my mind much more superior single column threaded design. That was at the back of the turntable. To the primary position, the 3 o'clock position, or you know, where you would consider a normal turntable arm to be, I was using then a SME M212, which again was a fine tone arm, and actually in my opinion I preferred it to the SME 5 or the SME V, which I had on the previous turntable, which I had an SME 20 turntable, and my acoustic signature Challenger replaced that. But that was purely on the grounds that I also had another turntable over to one side which was for playing old LPs and so on. So basically I just decided to use the money I got from the SME to buy a turntable that could take multiple arms. The SME M212 has gone, and that's been replaced by a 12-inch Gelco, which on audition was better than the M212, so that's I consider to be a significant improvement. The only arm that stayed the course from the very word go has actually been the Roxanne Nema, which has been a favourite of mine for a very long time, and I say coupled with my Decca London cartridge, I think it sounds superb. So currently I've got a Nema on the back with the Decca. I've got a Gelco 12-inch tone arm that's got an Autophon SPU or SPU nude elliptical, and a 3rd tone arm yet to be finalised, and then the 4th tone arm which will be on the pod over to one side, or the independent mount. It'll be back to this Rega. but I can see that going eventually for a better arm. And if I do go for an Origin Live, it will be one of the more budget models, which will then replace this, as it has a Rega fitting, so I can just drop it in, or I can just make a new top plate for it, and that'll replace the Rega, which will then be sold on. So that's it for now. I'll be back in a little while when I've done the work on the plates. So here we are, as intimated on the previous section, making a standalone pod for the tone arm, which I've now completed. The only real changes to the plan are some nice silvered metal locking nuts for the spike feet, rather than the black ones I had before. Just look more in keeping. Thumb nuts for the locking of the top plate. Unfortunately, the front one, the lift lower device, was catching against the tall locking bolts, so I had to put a standard one in, and in fact we'll look for a better replacement, something a bit shallower, or cut one of these down so that it more allows the queuing lever to drop without fouling it. But apart from that, everything went according to plan. The rods, as suspected, caused me an issue in that I didn't get them all exactly the same length, and had to use a couple of washers. Only on one I managed to get two exactly the same length, but as suspected, couldn't get them all exactly the same, so I had to use some packing washers on one to achieve a consistent length. And not as mentioned in the video, a 950 grams, not 950 kilos. That would be quite amazing to get 950 kilos into that small container, which gives it a bit of stability, but I think I might want to up that by getting 3 containers and putting them around the periphery at a later date. But as you can see, fairly successful. No issues at all with the machining, and it's all well, ready to go basically. The only issue I did have was this was obviously mounted in the 3rd position on my turntable, and I was going to replace that with an Origin Live arm. I've since bought the Origin Live arm. A review of that will be coming shortly. However, the Origin Live arm has an outrigger bias arrangement which is quite wide, and when I put this in the appropriate position on the turntable, as you move the arm across to the playing area, it did in fact foul the bias weight. So in the end I ended up taking the NEMA, which I use for my Decca London or London Decca cartridge, and putting that in the position where this was, and putting the Origin Live at the back of the turntable, which is much more satisfactory. And now I can get this into place and use it without fouling the arm to one side. It is quite cramped on the turntable with all 4 arms going, but at least I do get the option to use all of my cartridges. So without further ado, let's place this on the turntable in the appropriate position, so you can see it in situ, and then I'll set it up ready to go.